and welcome to the Aligned on AI podcast. Today, I'm joined by Chip D'Angelo, joining us from Princeton, New Jersey, in the US. So, Chip has spent an incredible 45 years in environmental remediation, environmental risk assessment, and project rescue work, including some seriously high stakes environments like high rise, occupied building, asbestos projects, and major government facilities and projects like the New York World Trade Centers, major landfills, hazardous waste sites. He's also built major businesses and repeatedly stepped into failing projects to fix what others couldn't. Chip's also the kind of person who prefers solving the problem to holding a meeting about solving the problem, which is why his career stories are so good and his success so great. So today we'll focus on his journey, how he adopted new technology early and made that work, why time fee work creates an earning ceiling, and how AI might help expert businesses buy back time and decouple value from hours, and also save a business's diminishing knowledge base as experienced key team members retire. So, Chip, welcome and thank you for joining me. Please tell us your origin story and how did you get started and what's the thread that links your career?
Thank you very much, Carl, for having me. And I've been looking forward to this. And thinking about it, trying to find a theme, there's two themes. And as we talk through the career and the subjects you've talked about, transferring knowledge and experts, and then how AI can help, there's two themes that come through on this. It seems like everything I've done has been started on the impact of environmental risks on real estate, on real property. My career has not been based on scientific studies or things like that. It's what's the risk of an environmental condition on real property, on real estate. But more important, as I think about it, it's not just the identification of that risk, it's the quantification. People tell an owner, you have a building full of asbestos. What does that mean to him? Quantify that for me. Is it very serious? Is it hazardous? What do I need to do? So the theme through my career has been the identification of environmental issues in real estate and real property, the health effects, the regulatory effects, and the cost effects, and then, quantifying that so that business owners and managers can make good business decisions. And as I think about the subjects you want to talk about today, that theme will transition through all of those, I believe.
Brilliant. And so asbestos in occupied buildings, the industry started in schools, I think, and yet you were challenged to provide a solution in buildings and environments where operations couldn't stop. I think you mentioned one to me was an occupied high-rise building housing 12 federal judges in their courtrooms. I guess that was early on in your career, but tell me, what was the breakthrough approach that made all this possible?
Yeah, again, it's very nice talking about this. Very flattering. Thank you. Early in an industry, and then I thought about this as well, you're kind of driven by the challenges in the market. So you're correct that they were also driven, the environmental industry, both in the UK and the United States, is always kind of driven by regulation. So in the late 1970s, regulations were coming out in the U.S. dealing with the discharge of waste water from factories into rivers and streams. And I was a young guy that was working for a company that was doing that, and it was great job. We're out, in blue jeans and in the daytime, crawling around streets, filling bottles of water, taking them to the laboratory. But we were asked to sample for asbestos in schools because our United States Environmental Protection Agency, our EPA, said to every school district in the United States, not a regulation, a guidance, go and inspect your schools for asbestos because it could be a hazard to your children. Well, that letter went out to every school and every parent in the United States, which of course drove an industry. So the industry started in schools. And again, the tactics or the procedures, again, quite simple. Go in and inspect the building, quantify the risk, how much is there, and then if you have to take it out, wait till summer, you shut the building down, you bring in an asbestos contractor, the UK did this, and you have, June, July, and August to get it removed, and hopefully it's all cleaned up and tested clean again. For September, the kids go back to school. So we started in that business like everyone else, and my first job in asbestos was collecting air samples in school. But what happened was that concern of asbestos and the health risk became popular in society, and so people started saying, well, what about buildings that aren't schools? And so you're correct that the first one we were challenged with was a 12-story high-rise building in New Jersey that housed federal courthouses. and it was literally full of asbestos, sprayed on fireproofing through the whole building, including the air handling room, the system, the room that handled the air handling system. So theoretically, being spread through the air conditioning system through the entire building. And this this owner was a public agency that had to do something about that, but basically said to us, "We can't shut this building down." And basically said to me and an architect who had brought us in, you have to find a way to remove this asbestos in that air handling room. In the air handling room, we couldn't even take a floor, vacate a floor without shutting this building down. And we got innovative. I can't, we bought in, and you're going to hear this theme throughout our talk today, multidiscipline. So asbestos has a couple different components. It's a structural component, it's an architectural component. We're in an air handling room, which is a mechanical component, mechanical engineering, how do air handlers work and how's air being moved. And it's an industrial hygiene component. Industrial hygiene is, how does that fiber behave in an airborne stream, and what's the risk of inhalation? Asbestos risk is inhalation. So I had on my team very good industrial hygienist. I brought in a very good mechanical engineer, and we really developed a way by modifying the HVAC systems in that room to keep them running. And I don't need to get too technical with you, but keeping them under positive pressure, which allowed us to remove the asbestos in that room with no risk of those fibers getting into the ducts. And I'll tell you in very simple form, we blew the ducts up like a balloon. So if you punched a hole in the duct, air would come rushing out. So if I have an air fiber outside that behaves like a feather, there's no way that airborne fiber is going to get into that duct because the air is going to push it out. It was really quite simple. It really was quite simple, but no one had done it before, and we did it. And we did it successfully, and we presented that project as a concept in a technical seminar about asbestos in school, asbestos in buildings. And there were people in the audience that were listening to us. And after that, we literally got inundated with requests from very large companies that had high-rise office buildings that said, we need your help. And my company exploded in that regard. We abandoned schools. We focused on high-rise buildings, on occupied buildings. And you said the White House, the Pentagon, IBM, data centers, facilities that could not shut down hired us. So it was very rewarding because no one else was doing it. And we published a book on it, actually a paper and then a book, and we became known as the high-rise experts. But it was back to my theme that we'll hear throughout this, multidiscipline, right? Bringing in experts from different disciplines and applying that expertise, so multidiscipline, innovation, and technology. And it wasn't sophisticated technology at the time, but it was still applying technologies, pressure monitoring and pressure monitoring devices. And as we talk about this too, believe it or not, it's not the technology we adopted for the pressure monitoring came from the UK. The UK was ahead of us in that regard. Supplier from the UK heard of our company, heard what we were doing, came over to meet me and showed me the technology that he had. The company still exists in the UK, Regency, I think it's still called. And they had technology that we didn't have. So we employed it. We said, this is perfect. This is what we need. So that theme of, multidisciplinary technology innovation is what got us into that space. And then that's what kind of launched the first business, which was predominantly an asbestos consulting business. And it became the largest in the United States.
So good. It's so impressive. So you obviously scaled that massively. Did that go overseas as well? What
Well,
did you do differently to grow that from, just having the knowledge to being an organization? Presumably this wasn't just personal heroics on your behalf.
that component did not really go overseas. So we'll talk about that. As we grew our business, we adopted and used other technologies that did go overseas, but the asbestos buildings technology for the first 5, 6, 7 years, so 80 to 85, 86, 87, expanded incredibly in the United States. We did a building in Mexico. We were asked to look at buildings in Italy, and I think we did some in Canada. But the training there was, and you're going to hear this theme, so I apologize for repeating myself, was hands-on, hands-on, hands-on. Okay, so we were hiring people literally as fast as we could that came out of those two disciplines or three disciplines: architecture, which understood how buildings were built; mechanical engineering, which understood air systems and air conveyance systems; and industrial hygiene. As you know, that what that discipline is, looking at the the effects, possible health effects to humans through inhalation or contact. So we married those three disciplines in house. And then that's really and it was interesting to see it happening because my team was great. To have an architect, a mechanical engineer, and an industrial hygienist at the same table. One was, mechanical engineers had any training in industrial hygiene. An architect never had an industrial hygienist had some training in mechanical. So putting those three individuals at the same table, looking at blueprints and how building was put together, figuring out how to deconstruct that building was part of the scaling. Training was always difficult, and we'll talk about that theme throughout this as well. But I had a client who was a large school district in Long Island, New York, and I hired one of their key administrators, and he ran a school system, and I set up a training division. So I had to build a training component internally because there wasn't one to go to. He was an educator. To talk about he was an educator. He wasn't an asbestos or mechanical engineer. He knew how to develop curriculum and programs and testing programs. He became a full-time employee and ran our training division, trained our own team. We ended up training probably 10,000 asbestos workers as well. So again, these themes, it's nice when I talk about this to you, it comes back to me. Pulling these multidisciplines together in the room that came from different expertise was we weren't smart enough to think about that in advance. It kind of happened. The thing was that it was going so fast that we were responding, and we responded in a way that turned out to be very successful and effective, more effective than as effective, which drove success.
So was that a conscious thing to, it's untested. I guess you had a good idea this was going to be, big or successful at least. Were you still responding to what was happening, or, were you actually foreseeing that, we're going to need a lot of people to do stuff that nobody's ever taught before, or was it happened so quick we had to react to what was actually happening on the ground?
Both. Once the business started, and it started as 4 or 5 people, and once it gained mass and had those experts in-house, we really did focus on training and recruitment. We did, and we had another person, a human resources person, just doing that because the industry was new, so you had to train. And we went to schools at universities, and we were looking for students or recent grads that had those backgrounds. And we didn't have to just go for industrial hygienists because we could take an engineer and train him in industrial hygienist. We could take an industrial hygienist and train her in engineering. So we had an internal recruiting component and training component, but we also replicated that process. So, and so because these themes are going to come out all the time. So as an example, we were on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Washington, if you know our geography.
So
We got work in California. That's the other side of the country. So we took key people from our East Coast office and moved them out there. We couldn't hire people out there because they didn't know our process. So we had to move key people out there to run that operation and then hire locally to get the bodies to implement it. So it was a combination of traditional and typical procedures. They just were happening very, very fast. So reacting as quickly as we could because the market was exploding.
did you see an explosion of competitors at that time as well? I mean, I guess there were people there spotting that there was, an opportunity here, and yeah, getting in there. Or were they actually slow to respond? You almost monopolizing it for a while.
Well, it's going to sound egotistical, but since we focused on high rises and occupied buildings, we really never had a serious competitor in that area. Since we abandoned schools, there was a lot of competitors in that school market, and there was another competitor that we respected that became the largest in schools. Asbestos regulations in schools in the United States came out in 1987, and that company did a smart strategy, developed the same types of replication of procedures for schools to satisfy that regulation. And he was a friendly competitor, and he had the same rapid growth as we did, but he was focused on the school industry. We were focused clearly on the high-rise buildings and the occupied buildings, not just high-rise. And so I got to tell you, we had very little competition. I mean, other people did it, but we were sought after, and it was very flattering.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. I had a great team, and we were young and responsive. We get on an airplane and be, in a city the next day when we got a call. And we're getting calls from pretty large organizations. Chase Manhattan Bank, which I'm sure you've heard of. Um, that just took us to Italy and said, I have 2 high-rise in Italy. So our client base was very prestigious, very large, owned a lot of buildings, back to that risk quantification. They had the risk as building owners. So we were in demand. I can't lie. It was flattering.
Brilliant. What an amazing place to be. And you didn't
Yeah,
stop there. I mean, there's the remediation contracting side of what you did. Please tell us about the technology you acquired or deployed globally that created real value.
that's a
Yeah, I
transition.
think
This is
yeah,
good. Well, the go back to that risk quantification and risk identification. So asbestos, you know, there's other risks to property. So let's talk about, inside a building, let's call it asbestos. There's other hazards in buildings, lead-based paint and PCBs and such, and they're all managed similarly. But then the industry grew in the United States and regulatory drivers. Well, what about the real problem? What about outside? What about the soil contamination and the groundwater contamination? So the same concept of looking at the risk, quantifying the risk, and then we kept getting asked, well, can you fix the problem? So, a lot of consultants are very academic and very esoteric, and they can come in and say, listen, here's what you have. I drilled a lot of holes in your property. I took a lot of samples. Here's a big report. You have this contaminant all over your groundwater. Well, that's great for a science experiment, no offense. But we were talking about a real estate owner transaction. He wants to sell that property. And we wrote a paper called The Discounted Value of Real Property Based on Environmental Hazards. So if a seller wants to sell it for X, a buyer says, wait a minute, it's contaminated. I want to pay you half of X. What's the quantification? What's it going to cost? So that we did it in asbestos, and then we moved into real estate transactions, which was then looking at the asbestos because we're in the real estate world. Asbestos, groundwater, underground storage tanks, soil contamination, and groundwater contamination. So in doing that, I'm going to come back to a technology in asbestos in a minute. We did the same thing. We kind of replicated a process for assessing that risk, which was a model. And this is a good lead in when we get further down our conversation to AI. AI didn't exist. But we took off the shelf technologies and merged them and created internally a risk model where we could go into take those engineers' reports, asbestos, groundwater, soil, and model the risk. It's called the Monte Carlo simulation. And we took cost estimating programs and CAD programs, which is a risk management program that insurance company used. And we created a product called Numerical. And what that did was that predicted the cost of your cleanup and cure. And it predicted it with a model. And it did another thing. So the model would create a bell curve while I'm going like this and say, well, your cost to clean are between 10 million and $15 million. And we're at, or 15 million and $50 million. And we're at 70% accuracy. The industry would say, well, 70% is not enough. So we perfected the model to identify the data gaps. And the reason there's a wide gap in the model is this information is weak. There's not enough here. There's a data gap. So let's spend another $25,000 and go sample or explore that component. And that would narrow the risk. And then we could get a model where
yeah,
the would look like this, and we could say your cost to cure is between $12.5 million and $15 million, and we're at a 95% confidence level. We weren't doing that because we were thinking about it and presenting it as a scientist. We developed a numerical model. It was also very successful, but it was, again, just like before, it was multidiscipline. We took different off because there was no model out there that did this. And Numerical is another product we developed and branded and used to do risk assessments on property transactions. Now, going back to technology, we did the same thing back on the asbestos days, even in schools. We did the largest school district in the fourth largest school district in the United States was the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania school district. 30 million square feet of space, 500 different buildings. And when you go survey all those buildings, that's a lot of data. And we'll talk about this too. Reducing data and being able to communicate results to a layman, a school board, is a challenge. So
yeah,
we took what was called a facilities management program, an off-the-shelf program, which was graphic based, and we And we bought a company in California that did that. They'd never heard of asbestos, but they had this facilities manage graphic-based facilities management program in multidiscipline. We put asbestos results in there so we could produce to the school not only 50, 60 binders of data, we could produce it on a laptop and say, here's your data. And they could go to a school, go to a floor of a school, the basement or the boiler room in this school, way out here, and see on a floor plan where their asbestos was. So it was a way of reducing data and presenting it in a way that a layman can understand it. So we did it for asbestos, and then we did the modeling component for real estate transactions for all the different environmental hazards. Does that make sense?
It does.
And there's one more, but maybe we'll come back to it. Then when we kept being asked to fix a problem, don't just analyze it for me, fix it, manage it. We weren't contractors. We were environmental managers, environmental project managers. The one fix was, of course, the occupied buildings component of. But then we also we started doing work in refineries and a place that had a lot of waste oil. There was huge lagoons. I remember flying over one in Mexico. So there's your international component too. That was waste oil from a refinery. So a refinery gets done making gasoline or a product, all the waste goes into a big lagoon. And this lagoon was 4 miles across, huge. Um, and it was waste oil, so it was full of water and solids, and so we actually acquired a technology in California again that could take that waste oil and separate it into three things: water, solids, where all the hazardous components became in the solids, and oil. And we could actually recover oil that was a product that we could sell back to that. That technology went international. Again, because our clients took us to their other facilities. Exxon, Total in France, BP, Shell, international oil companies that saw saw this technology we were deploying in the United States, took us to those countries. We went to South Africa, we went to France, we went to Venezuela, we went to Mexico, and we went to the United.
Fantastic story, and you didn't even finish there really. So you
I'm
became
reliving.
a bit of a
I'm
bit of a
reliving.
white.
Listen, wasn't me. I had a great team of people around
Yeah,
me all the time. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute when we come to the training component. So I never recovered oil. It was a centrifuge and an indirect thermal treatment system. I was never trained in that, but I assembled the experts that knew how to do it and gave them the resources to go do it. It wasn't me. It's not a white knight. It's truly I was blessed with having good people around me. We had a great team, and we incentivized them, and we were young, and the industry was young, and it was fun. I mean, it was energizing to find.
not surprised. I'm not
And,
surprised. I believe when insurers call, because the big projects have hit big problems, you're the man that they call. What is your focus now? What is the common pattern that you're seeing when these big projects go sideways?
well, the insurance component came. If you talk about the business that followed the industry, asbestos into other hazards in real estate transactions, quantifying the risk so there could be monetary quantification against the transaction. Then who would pay for that? And that's where insurance came in. So there was, and I won't get into that whole market, but there was an environmental insurance market that said, we as the insurance company are obligated to pay for that cleanup because our policy covered it until they excluded it. Or there's a new insurance product that if you buy the insurance, we'll pay for that cleanup. So the expertise we developed in risk quantification, again, that theme, we soon became attractive to the insurance carriers, especially that numerical model. Chip, how much is this going to cost? Because now they pay for it. And so they started having projects that they estimated at X to clean. They're paying out the bill every month. And they realized it was going to be 2 times X or 3 times X. And now it's significant, economic hit to them. So they would call us in and say, can you fix this? What's it going to take to fix this? And we came in and figured out the problem. But then they would say to us, before we write this policy or as we're doing this, can you quantify that risk? So we always seem to be attracted to the person who was paying the bill, because it's risk and transactions happen and insurance happens. And they're both huge billion-dollar industries, trillion-dollar industries. But these transactions are influenced and impacted by environmental hazards. So once we started to learn how to quantify it, learn how to fix it, insurance started getting involved to fix it. insurance carriers became our clients. And I would say at the end of when I sold my big business and what I'm doing now is consulting on all these things. It was 50% real estate owners and development, 50% insurance carriers. And they go kind of hand in hand because sometimes policies insure real estate, either historic policies or new policies. So the same skill sets and solutions could be easily applied to the insurance carrier. He just becomes the client because he has the liability and so we were always trying to solve environmental liability.
That's great. I want to move on just to talk about something I mentioned. I think the time fee ceiling. So in consulting, the better you get, the more you become the bottleneck in the business. In the UK, it's been historically difficult to recruit new specialists. You managed to get around that with your asbestos business by training in-house. And I guess that's not the norm situation for most businesses. Otherwise, what's your experience of that expertise bottleneck and the time you've got available? How do you manage that aspect that you haven't mentioned already?
Managing it is difficult. Solving it is even more difficult. And this is another discussion. This will transition to this discussion. My personal opinion is we're losing the expertise. As you know, you heard about this industry started. I started in 1979, 78. So all the individuals, men and women that started that early, are retiring or gone. And so and if you didn't bring people along with you, which we didn't, I don't not always did a good job, that expertise is based on hard knocks. That's an a term in U.S. term. It's based on experience. So how do you transfer experience? Because if you have young people that are trained and disciplined out of colleges, which they're being trained, if they're having the right education, how do they get the real world experience? So this is again a theme that I think we'll finish our discussions with. It'll go through this. Taking that expertise to a client to solve his or her problem, and then being that legal expert opinion, which is even more difficult in a courtroom, you can't get there without the expertise. And so you can't just transfer the experiences you've had. They become part of your DNA. You don't even realize that you're making opinions that are based on experiences you had. So, and you're not reciting them, but it's what did it. So it's very hard now, and I think our society, and we'll talk about AI, is a blessing and a curse here. It's kind of a dichotomy, in all honesty, in this business with remote learning and remote working, that's gone. So, when we talk about AI, and we'll close out, can AI help? Yes. But think about that. I believe, and remember, you look, I'm the older generation that, expertise is based on doing it. I did it. I collected those air samples. My people did. So then, you get the experience. And then you can't replicate that by doing it. So if we go to remote learning, getting certified on a 40-hour course on a computer laptop or remote working, you're not getting that. Remember I told you we in my office, I'd have a blueprints laid out on the table and I have an architect there. That's hands-on. And there could be young people that are there. And those young people are experiencing that. They're hearing that discussion. They're hearing the arguments. You don't get that in where we are. So our society is making it very difficult to answer your question. And AI to me is a blessing and a curse in that regard. And we'll talk about, as we finish up, I know you want to talk about how can AI help, and I'll tell you, but you're going to hear me say it can't replace an expert completely. That's unfortunate. So, I forgot exactly your question, but the theme is hands-on, face-to-face, and mentoring, and that's
Yeah.
done face-to-face. And, I hired a young college graduate that my daughter said, this young man's the boyfriend of one of my friends. Can you give him a job? I didn't know if I needed him, but he came to my office. He was in a suit and tie. He presented himself incredibly well. He had no experience. His name was TJ. It's a great story. So I hired him because he just impressed me. He was a young kid. And my partners and my other managers said, why did we hire him? We don't need him. I said, this kid's going to be good. And I put him out with one of my older guys. We weren't getting paid for his time on the client.
Yeah.
Hard time. I just put him out with one of my little guys. Just go with him every day. And, I'll see you in 2 months. Or just do whatever he says. The kid today is running his own business. So that mentoring, and I put him with somebody who I knew would train him, but it's not sitting him going to put him in a book. He's walking him through the real world. So that theme of it's hard to replicate that now, Carl, with AI. It just is. I'm sorry to say, and it's even harder to talk about if you have to be an expert, testifying expert.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what it touches on in very simple terms is, you learn and you remember things much more readily when you've actually experienced it in the flesh, don't you? We can all read, we can all ask, AI, I need help with this, and it will help you. But you're just doing the same thing that you did yesterday and the day before and the day before that. You're just reading and trying to remember what made that stand out, what made it, memorable. And that is, I think,
And what
I
went
was just
wrong?
going to say,
And what went
just
wrong? You have to have some.
yeah,
You have to have failures to have successes.
yes,
You asked me a question
yes,
before about, everything I'm telling you is all the good stories, the good news stories. We had failures. We
yeah.
tried technologies that didn't work. We had technologies come to us that we tried and spent money on that just didn't work. So, I'm talking about the successes we had, but you have to have failures. Why didn't it work? It was expensive. Why didn't it work? It didn't, the throughput wasn't far enough. Why didn't it work? It wasn't accurate enough. So you have to have failures to have experience.
Those failures that you experienced with technologies, were they failures that led you to evolve the technology and learn and improve it? Or were some of the technologies ones that actually they stood the test and they carried through and others were pushed aside? What sort of approach were you seeing happen?
It was more the latter.
Yeah,
More latter. We pushed aside. It's a strong word, but we abandoned the pursuit of that technology and looked for another one. And we didn't do a lot of adoption. I mean, when we talked about some of the first things we did, when we took different technologies and combined them, that was adoption. But then when we started looking for real world technology, especially in the remediation, the site remediation business, the oil recovery business, there was a lot out there because the industry was responding. We looked at a lot, and they didn't have everything you need. And a lot of them were very, very good, but not cost effective.
right.
A lot of technologies came on the scene that were excellent in their performance, but they weren't cost effective. So they became they weren't obsolete. They just weren't adopted, and therefore they failed in their successes.
Yeah, yeah. So if you were advising a high-end specialist consultancy or contractor today, how would you think about productizing the expertise or the technologies without reducing the quality? So this is in the context of AI, but what are your thoughts around that?
You say in the context or not in the context of AI?
In the context of AI, but
Well,
using your own experiences, I guess.
I'm going to switch kind of to AI now, so it may not be exactly the answer to your question, but
Yeah,
I
that's
think
fine.
we'll address it. When you get into the litigation expert and some of the high-end expert, there's tons and tons of data, a lot of data. So AI has a lot of opportunity there to, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but training someone and transferring that expertise, I keep coming back to it. I don't have a solution, even thinking about it in anticipation of this conference or this dialogue is mentoring hands-on face-to-face. I keep coming back to those three things. Don't endorse online learning. I endorse going to a classroom. That instructor in the face-to-face, you can ask him questions and you can get into a dialogue with that instructor. He or she has the experience. That gets transferred better that way. If you're doing an online course, you're listening to a lecture, you're answering questions. To me, that doesn't do it. And I see it in the young people that I have, that I interact with now. Mentoring, again, which is face to face, taking a young person in your organization, forget the litigation component, if you're an environmental engineering company or consulting company, taking these smart, people like the TJs and handing them to someone. Now, that's difficult because that's not cost effective. Engineers get paid by the hour, and if the client doesn't want to pay for that second person, some engineering companies won't make that investment. That's foolish. So there's one way to keep transferring that. You have to make the investment in your younger staff. He or she that can do it. Make the investment in them and do that just by putting them out with a mentor and not charging them because your client won't pay for that trade. But it'll be valuable to you. You're making an investment that'll be returned as the mentor gets older and slows down. Now you have the protege has adopted, fills his place. He or she's they can bill. So I don't have a solution other than these traditional old-fashioned things or concepts that have worked for me for 45 years, and I see them diminishing. I really do. And I think you hit on it, that transfer of expertise is difficult. And I see it's not just a bottleneck, it's going away, unfortunately.
It's on my mind. It's on, in quite a few conversations I'm having at the moment. It's part of the reason why I named what I'm doing Aligned Minds. This is about humans working with AI, and humans still have to work with humans to get the best out of this. I mean, we're seeing IBM at the moment. They've dedicated, I think, roles for 3,000 graduates or early career people, which is going against the trend. Maybe they're seeing where this needs to be. And there's a question there around, are people going to just rely increasingly on AI because they're not getting that mentorship, because they're not getting that training? Is AI becoming the boss? Is the human the assistant when it should be the other way around? Who's going to be able to make the final decision confidently? I think we've got some struggles there. But we are obviously seeing AI, a new technology that is decoupling time from earnings. What have you seen? Where do you think the biggest time and cost savings can be made easily?
And
I'm
there
sure
is
there's quite a few things.
and there is some. To your point, if you segregate again, in my mind, the consulting expertise where a company's being hired to do things, and the litigation expert, they're both experts. In the former, in the primary one, it has a lot. It will be moving toward AI. It's effective there because it's data, and it's data. And so AI, there's huge amounts of data. I mean, going back to litigation just a moment, when I'm in the litigation as an expert, I'm a litigation expert, I get these monstrous reports. I get pages and pages and documents, legal boxes full of documents, full of data. I get a report that you can have, 300 pages, well, 50 of it are relevant. The rest is all data. So data reduction and summarizing, AI, unbelievable in the ability to do that. So that's not a bottleneck. You don't need an expert to do that. AI can do that. So in the data reduction component, data analysis component, like our old technology numerical, it's huge, and it saves a lot of time and a lot of money for everybody. So I really, really endorse that component. The other thing, not only data reduction, summarizing that data and presenting it. AI can create timelines, so to speak. Okay. They can create trends in analytical data that take a lot of time for someone to do the old fashioned way. That's important, especially when you're quantified or you're arguing over the level of contamination. Get it quantified. You can see that. Timelines. Often a litigation claim expert is delay. An AI can produce a timeline and can definitively document and determine the delay in days or weeks caused by X. That, again, it's a dichotomy and conflict. So sometimes I'm going to tell you that the expert's opinion at the end of the day is what counts, because he's going to be deposed and asked and have to support it. But having that to rely on can be very helpful. And the other thing, back to the litigation expert, summarizing and creating graphics and timelines. This is very important. When you're in a litigation, you're dealing with lawyers, mediators, and judges. You're talking about a technical case. An environmental case is very technical. No offense, they don't understand it. They haven't
Sure.
been.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to translate it to them. That's not wrong. They're not going to read all those documents. They don't know what parts per million and parts per billion and parts per trillion. And there's all those different chemical names that we test for. So that AI can produce data reductions and timelines and graphs and things that will allow the expert to translate that better to the court. And that to me removes a bottleneck. So the expert himself doesn't have to do that, because that's a lot of his time or her time. I'm going to go and put the last piece together now, but he or she as an expert can't rely on that. Has to be able, because under deposition and cross-examination, he or she can't say it's all AI. He can't. He has
That's right.
to be able to support his own opinion. Did you rely on that for your opinion? No. I relied on it simply to summarize the data for me. That's where AI is. I don't know where it's going in the litigation side. I'm using it for data reduction, but I'm not using it. I still suggest the opinion always has to be the opinion of the expert because that's what's going to be challenged is his expertise. So that's where AI integrates, but I don't think it's the problem solver completely for the environment for the litigation expert. That
Yeah,
makes
I
sense.
think it does. I think it raises the question as well. I mean, probably because what this is what we're used to, but we're looking at this from the contracting, consulting, the expert from that perspective point of view. But I guess this is going to be the opposite side. There's going to be the judges who are trying to make sense of data as well, and they're going to be tapping into AI to try and find
But
angles as
that's
well.
okay. That's okay. That's okay because if the data's right, it'll tell them it's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's okay. That maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the other thing AI does is it can analyze, it could give you a scenario of what the cross examination could look like. It could simulate, it could give you an outline of an expert report. So it can streamline the
yeah,
process
yeah.
complete and which reduces time, reduces cost, that gives more capability and capacity to the gray-haired expert who's doing a lot of that now. Does that make sense? So that's going to
It
free up
does.
some bottleneck, if you will. But I'm going to keep going back to face-to-face training, mentorship, field experience, and real, not always online learning. I just can't get away from that. And I'm sure maybe 10 years from now it won't even exist. But I still think it's got value, and I
Yeah,
still
I
I
think
still encourage it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the pressure is there, though, isn't it, on consultancies, and it stems down to who the clients are as well. That it's what is the most cost effective solution today for them to give a result that suits their situation, but that's not the long term maybe best route. To really retain this kind of knowledge and expertise, because it is just going to maybe potentially just accelerate that loss as those who with the most experience retire, hang up their boots. Um, AI has got a role to play there, but it's probably got a lot to answer for as well. I mean, what would you see AI is going to need and is capable of capturing a lot of knowledge and expertise that's been built up in a business? I mean, what do you think the key things would be that you'd want to capture? It's very hard to capture your experiences unless you sat down and did a detailed sort of biography yourself. But what do you think? What sort of the key things that you'd want to capture that AI can really help um, those coming through their career with?
Well, one of the pieces is it can expand the research far beyond what a human can do as far as capacity of research. So it can introduce concepts or ideas or conflicts in the case. I'm into testifying expert that that the expert may miss. So I think that's a value, strong value, especially preparing for a case. You're preparing with an attorney to get prepared for cross examinations and such. You have to anticipate the other positions and the questions you're going to get. AI, I think, can really do a lot there that humans can't. They can look at look at other cases, and so I think there's some. That's where I think there's some values. Don't I don't have a silver bullet solution here. I don't, and I've been thinking about it in anticipation of this conversation. I think this what you're Carl are raising for discussion is very pertinent and very timely, and we'll need more. But I'm anxious to see how AI behaves or influences environmental litigation. It's going to, and probably is more now than I think. But so I could AI now and say, give me all the cases in this area, and see what they are. The old days, I'd have to go to a whole nother database to find all those, and then I could say summarize those and how do they compare to my case. So that there's a lot of that's a lot of use that the expert can find. But I've said it 5 times. I'll probably say it 5 more. That opinion has to be the opinion of the expert to be
Yeah,
valid. It has to.
absolutely.
Maybe again in 20 years, maybe it'll be the AI expert against the other AI expert. I don't know. I'm in the transition from the old school to the new world right now, Carl. So I think this is a very timely discussion that you're having with people like me, and I encourage you to keep doing it to find a solution, and so your audience can help find their own solution.
I think you're absolutely right with your sort of analysis there. In that we are in a transition. I think AI isn't good enough to do the expert's job right now, and it does need hand holding. It does need babysitting, to really make it work properly. But you're right. what will it be in 10, 20 years time? The rate of acceleration of improvement of AI is mind-boggling, really. So it's really hard to predict and visualize, what we're going to be dealing with over the next few years. And maybe, the roles of, these early career people, maybe people who are still at college, is going to be different. Maybe they don't need to be the experts that we're trying to do. Maybe they don't need the experts. It's really hard to really fathom. I think, as long as we're on the train for this ride, I think, it's the best place to be because, things are changing, that's for sure.
I agree. The last thing, I was just thinking as you're saying that, compare it to the medical community and doctors, I always said, my general practitioner, my doctor's 70-some years old. He's great. He's got all that experience. But now, and I'm not a medical expert in any way, shape, or form, the diagnosis and ability to perform surgeries and such by AI has orders of magnitude more and has eliminated the need for that expertise. So I think, I think it's on the right trend. I think that trend is being converted in the environmental expertise world. So I think you're right. It's certainly heading there, and it's heading there very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Chip, everybody I've spoken to, I've asked this question, and I know I mentioned it to you earlier. That so you mentioned a number of books to me that you'd recommend. You focused really on asbestos remediation, which is good. I don't mind that at all, and I'll provide a link to all the books that you recommended to me. But which one of those stands out as the primary recommendation? I think there were.
Well, go back to asbestos. There's a book called Fatal Deception, and that's a diversion from the conversation we've had over the last 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But the asbestos industry was the asbestos industry of creating products for asbestos held that knowledge of the health effects close to their chest for many, 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 many years. And as you know, shipyard workers and naval seamen and those exposed to asbestos in the 40s, 50s, and 60s are dying at alarming rates. And there's a disease called mesothelioma that's only linked to asbestos exposure. So that's an interesting read. It's not relative to the rest of the conversation we had, but if you really want to see, what drove the asbestos industry, and it's real. It's a hazardous material. It's crazy that this fiber. It's a solid, cause this kind of disease. So that Fatal Deception is an interesting book. If you want me to research or cut back to you on some of these others, but I don't know of a publication that talks about the use of AI for environmental expertise. But in the asbestos world, that's an interesting book.
I think that's fine. A lot of the people that I know and built up sort of special relationships over time, they're from the environmental background. They're from the land development and built development sector. So it's just as relevant to have. People are mentioning all sorts of books. Yeah, that's just as relevant. So Chip, what an incredible journey you've had. It's great to hear about your experiences over this time. Genuinely useful for anyone running an expert business. I think it's been amazing to have you join me on the podcast. So thank you for joining me, Chip.
Thank you for the opportunity to relive it. It was exciting. It still is, but thank you very much, Carl.
Brilliant. To our viewers or listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please follow Aligned Minds AI on LinkedIn for practical AI tips and updates on future episodes of Aligned on AI. Thanks for listening or viewing, and we'll see you next time.